Crosstalk, the unintentional transfer of signals between communication channels, a casual conversation.
Alright, hello world, this is Video Game Crosstalk, the bi-weekly podcast of gamers talking about tech, science, and whatever else comes to mind. I'm your host, Anthony Rossi, and with me this week is Joe Berman. Joe, what's going on?
Not much, man. What's going on?
Hey, little something different this week. You might be able to tell in the recording quality of this. We are actually in the quasi-recording studio of my dining room right now. Joe is a close friend of mine. I haven't seen him in way too long, and he doesn't have the proper recording equipment at his house. So we're going to have to throw a microphone in the middle of my dining room table and see how this turns out. So, Joe, as I said, a good friend of mine from a while back, he is involved with a lot of sustainability and sustainability initiatives. So, Joe, what can you tell me what's going on in the world of sustainability?
Whole bunch of really interesting things are going on in the world of sustainability.
What is your background as far as sustainability is concerned?
Well, right now I'm running a consultancy. It's J.S. Berman Consulting, and we basically provide sustainable business solutions and sustainable business guidance to corporations and trade organizations. With a focus predominantly on trade industry and on the building sector. And there's also quite a bit of focus on food and on ag.
And so, by ag, we mean agriculture.
Agriculture, sorry, yep. I don't mean to jargonize too early on in the conversation.
Oh, don't worry, we'll get it nerdy.
The jargon will be deep.
The jargon will be deep, indeed.
My background typically puts me in a position where when I talk about sustainability, I'm focusing on building or building-related, sustainability technologies or means and methodological approaches, or on things that connect directly to the food industry. The stuff that I think I'm really focusing on right now, or the stuff that I think is interesting and really cutting edge, is really, at least on the building side of things, is the movement towards virtualization.
Really?
And yeah, it's the movement towards virtualization and a recognition that buildings and really the built environment they're being recognized within, I think, the more sophisticated ends of the building community as organismal. In that, buildings basically have a biology, they have a functionality, and, that roughly mirrors what biological organisms, require to survive. They have respiratory systems, they have power systems, they have intelligences. They have waste systems that, from a configurational perspective, really roughly, mirror organic biologies. And when you start to look at those things en masse, you start to look at the built environment really as kind of more ecosystem-oriented. When you start to integrate things like the Internet of Things or hyper-virtualization or the application of mobile technology into that perspective on buildings, the conventional thinking of the built environment, it becomes something fundamentally different. It becomes almost an ecological perspective, or a much more biological perspective on the built environment. So there's an evolution, I think, that's going on in the building industry that is moving more in that direction, especially as virtualization allows for more sophisticated, more intelligent, better pre-programming of building systems, so that the biology of those buildings and the biology of those systems operates at a higher, I guess, sort of more optimized frequency that really roughly mirrors high-functioning organisms.
Wow. All right. Okay.
So that's the building side of things.
That's the building. Well, let's talk about that a little bit. You're referencing or framing building and building projects in an organic type of framework. Mm-hmm. So how would you break that down? You mentioned, well, waste is pretty easy to imagine.
Sure.
I mean, people are inside the building, they operate, they generate waste.
Sure.
Any type of waste, be it just paper waste or packaging, or depending on what that business is. You mentioned agriculture, so of course there's going to be shrink or food that just didn't sell or food that isn't up to quality or something like that. So what other systems would you equate in this virtualization of a building?
Well, what's interesting is that, when you look at your own biology, okay, and think about the waste that your body generates, and it's roughly the same for a building. I mean, there's effluent, there's human effluent, there's the conveyance mechanisms, which are, your plumbing systems and your toilet systems, and they do essentially for a building what your body does naturally.
Yeah. And that's actually kind of significant. I'm not sure how many people really think about that.
Seriously, the building biology really roughly mirrors a human biology. You've got your HVAC, which essentially equates to a human respiratory system. You've got your power systems, which equate to really kind of your cardiovascular system, ostensibly. You've got building intelligence, centralized building intelligence, that you're building automated systems that can be pre-programmed to make all of the other systems within the building not only function but function interdependently, which is really interesting. And then, what's really remarkable about I think sort of the respiratory cycle of the building and the energy cycle of the building is that buildings produce emissions profiles that are really very closely equivalent to the human respiratory process and to the CO2 and the various other gases that you give off just from breathing. So, I guess I see building biology and human biology is really kind of analogous to each other in a lot of ways. And what's remarkable is if you've ever been in a public space where there's tons and tons of people and seen how they interact with each other, really we have the opportunity to look at urban landscapes in a not radically dissimilar sort of way, where the urban landscape and its biological needs, or its sort of its bio-building related needs, really in a lot of ways kind of mirror what complex densely populated human systems look like at an organic level.
And this just popped into my head. It is amazing how many non-organic things end up acting like organic.
Absolutely.
I was thinking about this when I was learning about computers like years ago, properly learning about computers and how they're designed and how they're built and how their memory and the storage works. And the way that it was described was in terms of the human brain. So you have the central processing unit, the hard drive, and the RAM, or like your basic and the CPU or the microprocessor that controls everything. That's kind of like the brain. Your hard drive is like your long-term storage, and your RAM is your short-term memory. And that's the way it was designed. I couldn't help but think, was the computer designed after the brain?
I think it's interesting. My mind immediately jumps to neural networking when you start having a conversation in that way, in that I would think that the pathways that are designed into the computational systems required to operate buildings are probably, I think maybe from a design perspective, not radically dissimilar to what you would see in complex neural networking.
Like, maybe if it wasn't even intentional, I think it just kind of ended up being that way.
I think that, it's funny because there's this really interesting school of design called biomimetics, which is one of like the sexiest design concepts I have ever heard.
That's going to get a link in the show notes later on.
Okay,
so biomimetics?
Biomimetics. Okay, and so biomimetics ostensibly is this notion that the things that we design most effectively mirror naturally occurring organisms, essentially, in that, so if you look at evolutionary biology,
all right,
as an example, the systems, the organisms that are alive on this planet right now are the byproduct of hundreds and hundreds of millions of years worth of really essentially like Darwinistic natural selection. And so
Right.
the stuff that's here right now is extraordinarily sophisticated.
Wow, one moment. That noise that you just heard in the background, being that we are in the recording studio, that is the dining room, we also are privy to the activity and sounds generated by other organisms, such as our dogs. So that thump was Sophie taking out one of her Kongs, and she's just kind of laying there. How you doing, bub? Yeah, and Kenzie's over there on the couch. She's not making too much noise. But
I'm going to make a Kong joke, but anyway.
All right, so yeah, we've got our audio recording assistants at work in the background. All right, so yeah, biomed. That's
Well, so basically, the thinking is behind biomimetics. If you look at organisms as they are currently, and
Okay.
you look at the sophistication of organisms as they are currently, and if you look at essentially the design behind the biology behind those organisms, these are organisms that have gone through hundreds of millions of years worth of natural selective processes to be the thing that is the most successful thing that allows it to exist now.
Yeah.
So you can't
very
have,
fine refining.
Oh my God, it is like the ultimate quality control, quality assurance mechanism. And so what ends up happening through a process like biomimetic design is that the engineering and design community is looking at the extraordinarily battle-tested design foundations of biological systems or you know, organic organisms or whatever, and it's mimicking the things within those, I guess, sort of naturally occurring biological systems that work most effectively, and then embedding them into
And
whatever
we've been seeing that.
Yeah.
We've been seeing that all over the place.
Absolutely.
Where you see the stuff pop up on your social networks where it's like, this thing walks like a caterpillar. This thing, it's got wings that fold like a bird. That's exactly what it is. These designs have evolved through trial and error, lots of error, and a few successes. But these are the most efficient designs occurring naturally. So, you know, seek inspiration somewhere. Seek inspiration from something that works.
Absolutely, and you know, it's interesting because as you were talking, my mind went very quickly to things like virtual reality. You know what I mean? And so, you know, if biologically we're capable of connecting with the natural world through, you know, our various senses, I think one of the most interesting offshoots of what this biomimetic design constitutes is the desire to create an alternative reality that will either mirror or supersede our ability to connect with the one that we're operating within, naturally speaking. So anyways, I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's what these conversations are all about.
Absolutely.
So, yeah, sustainability. Getting way back.
You want to talk food?
Yeah, sure. Let's go for it.
All right. So you know, one of the neat things that I've seen, you know, on the food landscape, and I'm going to stay away from potentially political hot button topics like GMOs because those tend to stir ire on both sides of the debate.
Yeah.
But you know, outside of that, you know, one of the things that I find really concerning, but at the same time, I think kind of inspirational. Like, I see an amazing challenge that we're going to be connecting with as a species in the very near future, if not in the immediate. And that's that, you know, by 2050, we're going to have 9.5 billion people alive on this planet. We're living in a world that will become ever more resource constrained. We're living in a world where income inequality is really kind of the socioeconomic milieu that we all operate within globally, and that stratification of wealth is only increasing in pitch and dimension as time goes on.
Right.
And, you know, we're also living in a world where global food systems are going to be stretched to sort of ever you know, more demanding limits as time goes on. And, you know, and that's not, I guess, sort of a single valence argument in that, you know, we're going to be dealing with water issues. We're going to be dealing with arable land issues. We're going to be dealing with changing rainfall patterns. We're going to be dealing with rising ocean levels. So there's going to be some really significant things.
Well, and that kind of goes back. Last episode, I had Nikki Vick on, who was totally awesome. You guys should absolutely go back and listen to that episode. She's a fantastic chick, real cool. And in relation to that episode, my original guest I had mentioned is Paul Gallery, who is involved with wilderness conservation. He is actually still out on the West Coast helping out with the wildfires.
That's and you know what? You're completely correct. Actually, the wildfires example is a perfect example.
It is a perfect
because
example.
okay, let's talk wildfires for 1 second, and then let's tie it into the flooding that we're dealing with down in places like Baton Rouge.
Right.
You know what I mean? We're dealing with a fundamentally destabilized global climate, and that is going to put some really significant stresses on the integrity of our food system, not only domestically but internationally.
One more quick side note. This is not a political podcast. I do not want to dip into the politics at all. And Joe is like wildly shaking his head right now. No,
this is an apolitical conversation.
Apolitical. We will adhere to the established and evidence-based research. Global warming and climate change is real. Humans are causing it.
Yep.
End of discussion.
Yeah, that's pretty much where we live.
Okay. So, so the wildfires out west and the flooding going down in Baton Rouge.
Yeah, I mean, those are really fantastic examples of. I mean, climate change is really typified by extreme climate conditions. And aberrantly extreme climate conditions. I mean, we have been. This is the hottest year on record for God only knows how many years, and it's been like that for God only knows how many years. I mean, the trend is obviously getting hotter, and that produces some pretty specific, weather-related effects or whatever. So anyways, that's going to have some pretty significant impact on both domestic food supply chain integrity, and it's also going to have a pretty significant impact on global food systems. I think we sort of take for granted the relative abundance that we have in our domestic food system. I think we have to start to look at this on a more globalized level and recognize the fact that there are places in the world right now where climate change related, food instability or insecurity is producing, major geopolitical uprisings. It's producing war. I mean, these are things that have been documented by the Pentagon, and they're only going to increase. They have been cited by the Pentagon as some of the highest level national security threats that this country is going to be facing over the next 50 years.
And it's odd to think of climate change affecting these things.
Oh, absolutely.
Well, when you factor in the desperate... You all right over there, Pop? Sorry, a little bit of chaos going on in the other room. When you factor in these food shortages or these desperate measures that are caused by the climate change, you're creating a very desperate populace at this point who are either willing to do desperate things, or this is the kind of stuff that they're kind of forced into.
Sure.
And when people get desperate and restless, there's going to be chaos.
There's going to be chaos. There's going to be geopolitical unrest. There's going to be conflict. Period. I mean, at the end of the day, what we're talking about here is the catalytic factors that contribute to global conflict.
Right. So it's not a direct result. It's more like a secondary. There's a correlation.
There's a correlation, and climate change is going to create all kinds of ancillary, I guess, sort of more idiosyncratic and circumstantial offshoot effects or like secondary effects. And they're going to do everything from sort of destabilize, global food systems to, deal with things like ocean level rise and ocean acidification, etc. So, anyways, I didn't want this to be all gloom and doomy. So the direction that I was hoping to take this in was the fact that these are gargantuan issues that we're going to be dealing. These are, I think, honestly, some of the most significant challenges that we will have faced as a species since like kind of the last glacial maximum, like 12,500 years and change ago, which was the last time that we saw a global climate change that had anything that was even roughly equivalent to what it is that we're going to be experiencing over the next 100 years or so. So you can look at this as all gloom and doomy, or you can look at it as a catalyst for innovation. You can look at it as an opportunity for humans to become more sophisticated, more adept at adapting to changing climates, not only here on this planet, but also at some point in time as we start to move and hopefully colonize other planets, which I think will be, happening probably within the next 100 years. I think that's a relatively conservative estimate given what SpaceX is doing and given what, some of the NASA projects that are going on, et cetera.
And despite the SETI extraterrestrial
and non sequitur.
This was in my show notes. I want to talk about the SETI investigating possible extraterrestrial signal from deep space.
which sadly will not be our extraterrestrial overlords coming in from 95 light years away from the Hercules galaxy. And
no, just the...
We're kind of sad that our backyard visitors aren't going to be coming and hanging out with us anytime soon.
Oh, well.
So anyways, back to the challenges portion of things, which I think is super interesting. One of the primary stressors and one of the primary concerns with this global food insecurity, as we're going to be dealing with it over the next 50 years and change or so, is protein scarcity.
Okay.
So how do you provide protein to a growing population, in a resource scarce world that's dealing with things like climate change? I'm kind of happy to report that there's some really interesting, innovative technological development in terms of. I know that folks are familiar with new 3D printer technology, but there's 3D printer technology now that is being used to print food, which I think is kind of remarkable. In that the print medium is.
It's basically, what would it be? Like proteins and glucose and stuff like that?
Well, ostensibly, yeah. Essentially what you're talking about is using animals. So the example that I wanted to use was, right now there is a company that is starting to print hamburgers. Now, they're printing hamburgers out of cultured cow cells. They're basically beef cells, for lack of a better way of putting it, that have been cloned in a laboratory and are not from any living quadrupedal organism that's ever walked around and eaten grass.
That is amazing.
It's pretty remarkable. And so, imagine if the meat that we wind up eating over the next 50 years, is ultimately sourced not necessarily from the field or from the farm, but is cultured in a lab and can be cultured to whatever extent is necessary to feed, the protein needs of an ever-expanding global population. So I see those kinds of technological innovations and the stability that they could conceivably lend to our global food supply chain as some really positive outcomes from, what could be conceived of as climate stress, within the food system.
And this is literally straight out of a book I read several years back, and I can't remember if it was either Neuromancer.
I love the fact that you're referencing Neuromancer, but anyways.
Yeah. It was either Neuromancer or Count Zero. I don't think it was Mona Lisa Overdrive. It's within the Sprawl trilogy by William Gibson, and there was a scene, I think it was Neuromancer, because the main character was still kind of tweaking out on whatever quasi-dystopian futuristic drugs they were taking in the series. But he was at some classy restaurant, and he is spaced out on whatever techno cyberpunk meth variant,
cocktail,
whatever they were taking in that series. And he's all spaced out in this fancy restaurant, and the people that he's kind of like undercover with are raging mad. Like, you're in this expensive place. This is naturally grown beef. They actually had to provide for it and feed this animal and raise it before it was slaughtered. This wasn't something that was grown in a lab.
Yeah.
And that was written in, I've got the wiki page up right now. So Neuromancer was released in 1984, and we are now in 2016. Fiction has become reality
in every conceivable way when it comes. It's funny because as you were talking about that, I was also thinking about Philip K. Dick and do Android Stream of Electric Sheep, and that's a much deeper rabbit hole that goes in a different direction. But,
yes, it does. Yes, it does.
But you're right. Science fiction has become science fact and science reality at this point in a variety of different ways. And when you start talking about some of the gene sequencing work that's being done right now, and when you start talking about the fact that at a cellular level we're able to replicate even the most basic building blocks of the food that we eat, and we've developed technology that allows for us to print those building blocks into forms that will really provide the kind of nutritive properties that we need to survive. The possibility for us to live in a very different I guess sort of food reality is really kind of immediate. And from a sustainability perspective, it's funny when you talk about things like just use the beef industry as a perfect example.
All right, go ahead.
If you look at the emissions from the beef industry, it actually exceeds the emissions that come out of single passenger automotive vehicles in terms of its climate change impact. The beef industry alone has an absolutely gargantuan emissions profile, and it is contributing actively in a very aggressive way to the climate change that we're experiencing, because it's field grown. So what happens if what we're talking about over the next 15, 20 years is a fundamental paradigm shift to lab grown, cultured, I guess sort of beef-based protein? What does that do to our ability to reduce climate change impacts? It could potentially be really significant. So, when science fiction becomes science fact, and it provides us with an opportunity not only to feed an ever-expanding global population, but also to do it in a way that's more sustainable and reduces our anthropogenic impact on global climatological systems. That's a pretty remarkable thing that we're doing in terms of our ability to overcome, the challenges that we're being faced with presently. And that's just kind of one example.
Yeah, and it is, I will admit, it is freaky to think about that.
Yeah,
it is absolutely freaky to think about that. But given the situation that we're in, is that what we need to do?
One of the things that I think is going to be remarkable about the next 100 years is I think that we're going to find out we have been in a relatively stable geological time period for about, 10,500 years. And I'm totally treading on this lightly because there is a very adept geologist sitting on the other side of the wall right now. Yeah. And I'm hoping I'm getting my timelines right. But, when we were in the Holocene was a roughly, is it 10 or 12,000 years? 10,000-ish, right?
Both are healthy.
Both are healthy? Okay, good.
Okay. Yes, by the way, my wife is in the living room right now, and she is actually a geologist.
She's a geologist, and legitimately, I'm treading very lightly on this subject right now for fear that I'm going to be rebuked at the end of this podcast. But, it was a really stable, climatological period for the planet. And now we're in this thing called the Anthropocene, which is, it's essentially the anthropomorphically impacted, global climate as it's changing dynamically right now. And I think that our ability to adapt to that changing climate and to the population growth issues and the resource scarcity issues that we're going to be facing, we're already facing them, is really kind of going to be the biggest set of challenges that we've ever faced as a species on this planet, because there have never been more people. The
population is out of control.
It's out of the population it is an unsustainable population growth curve at this point. We're dealing with things, in a resource constrained world. The climate is changing, and we've never had to deal with these kinds of stressors simultaneously at any given point in the history of our species. So this is one of those adapt and evolve. This will test the really kind of the mettle of our species adaptability.
And these are not future problems.
This is right now.
This is right now. Like, we are in the middle of it. Like,
yes, we are.
The start of these problems has already gone and passed. Like, we're beyond what's the issue going to be in a few years. Like, we're here.
It's here.
It's here.
Anyways.
So.
Sustainability.
So how long have you been involved in sustainability?
Too long. It's been...
Because you and I were co-workers at our former place of employment.
Which shall remain nameless.
Yes, we shall remain nameless. And that was... When did you swing by? It was way before I was dating that lovely woman in the other room.
I started working there in 2009, and I have been a sustainability professional kind of ever since then. So
we're talking 7-ish years.
Yeah, 7-ish years, give or take.
Haven't quite hit a decade yet, but
no, I have not hit a decade yet. I shudder to think the cynicism that will come with that decade. I hope that there's like a ring or something that you get when you deal with that. But anyways,
you'll get an Xbox achievement.
Well, I will get an Xbox achievement.
Bing!
You've been practicing sustainability for 10 years. Have a widget.
Oh, man. So that's awesome. As far as tech stories are concerned, we're already pretty well into this podcast. But as far as science is concerned, we're going to make this a little more lighthearted. Bill Nye has landed a Netflix show.
We love Bill Nye. This country, this world needs more Bill Nye.
This world definitely needs more Bill Nye. And I was thinking, leading up to this podcast, and I was flipping through the news articles, and there's a ton of them out there. Everyone, I was like, oh my god, Bill Nye is going to get a show. I can't help but think, I'm going to bring the show down a little bit again.
Do it. No, it's good.
It's kind of
current,
sad.
though. That's real. I mean, that's.
It's why do we need a celebrity to bring these issues to light?
It's a really interesting question, but one of the things that's when you started talking about Bill Nye, I started thinking about someone like Neil deGrasse Tyson. You know what I mean? And I think that it's a very rare personality that has the ability to take complex, technical, scientific subject matter and make it interesting and engaging to the general public in a way that is accessible. Yeah. You know what I think you have? I don't think it's about celebrity. I think it's about communications competency. Okay. I think that guys like Neil deGrasse Tyson or like Bill Nye have found a communications methodology that allows them to really connect with the general public in a way that and I'm going to tread lightly on this, that I wish the rest of the academic scientific community was more able to emulate. Because one of the things, and I'm loath to admit this, in the United States right now, is that our scientific literacy, at least as we sit in, relation to some of the other countries in the world, we're not as literate as we could be. We're not as literate as we should be. And I think, the more folks like Bill Nye or the more Neil deGrasse Tysons that we have out there that are able to bridge that communications gap and make science interesting and engaging and understandable for the general public, I think it's great, to be honest with you.
My wife and I actually were able to go see a live, I guess we'll call it show. Neil deGrasse Tyson actually came to Proctor's Theater in Schenectady.
I've been told he is awesome live.
He is hysterical.
Love it.
It was several hours of him just talking about Hollywood, actually, and how
that must be really entertaining.
Oh, it was 30 years or so of science in the movies, and he explained like where they got things right and where they got things wrong.
Oh my God, I heard something on NPR about that where he was talking about watching a movie and he basically sat and nitpicked. It might have been like the new Star Trek or the first new version of.
He's done that for several things.
He said that he was looking at the constellations or the placement of the stars in the opening sequence and basically said that they were wrong, which I have to tell you, I think is one of the most fantastic, talk about a continuity issue.
He did that for the Titanic.
That's what it was.
It was the Titanic.
Okay,
yep. It was the exactly Titanic.
Yep.
He looked at it and he's like, those stars, oh God, how did he put it? We know the date. We know the time. We know the location. We know
accurate,
everything.
People.
Yeah. And he said not only that, but he drew a line down the center of the screen and removed some of the special effects, and it was a mirrored image of the stars. So it was like they just made a star cluster on one side and then just mirrored it over across the center point. What? And he's like, this is crap.
That's just
And he actually, who was it Cameron? That did the movie?
Oh God, what is his name?
It's not like I don't have the internet in front of me.
The internet.
Yeah, internet. Get another window open.
Titanic. Who was it?
Oh, come on.
I feel like I should know this. This is like Pop Culture 101.
The film, 97. Jeez.
God, that was a while ago, wasn't it?
Yeah. James Cameron. Okay, so
it's funny. I wanted to say James Cameron, and then I was pretty sure that he was a prime minister in England, and it didn't sound right to me. It is James Cameron that's a prime minister in David Cameron. Okay, wrong Cameron. Thank you. I was going to say that was the Cameron that threw me off, and I was
as soon as you say Cameron, I think you're right.
You're like, maybe.
So yeah,
all right. Joe apparently fails world leaders for take world leaders for 200, Alex. But anyways,
and
I lost my 200, but that's neither here nor there.
But he talked to James Cameron and he complained to him several times at different banquets and stuff like that. And Cameron would just kind of smile and say, "Did you know that my movie made this many millions of dollars or something?"
Ooh, burn.
But he was going to make a remake and a remaster of it, and apparently someone from his production company gave Neil deGrasse Tyson a call and said, "Hey, I'm with James Cameron. We're going to do a digital remaster."
That's fantastic.
And he says that you've got a star map for me to use. So in the remaster,
too cool!
Yay, nerds!
Yeah, I was going to say science wins.
And science wins. So Bill Nye is going to be jumping on Netflix. Did you watch any of Cosmos?
I did watch some of Cosmos, yeah. I thought it was extraordinarily well put together.
That was very well put together.
It was super engaging. It was definitely spoken. It was definitely communicated in a way that was incredibly accessible.
It was very accessible. It was very well produced.
Yep.
And from Seth MacFarlane, there we go. From Seth MacFarlane, it was very serious.
It was very serious.
Something completely unexpected given his previous bodies of work, but
sure. But I think he recognized the fact. I think that he recognized that there was something that was very important that needed to be put out
exactly
into the
what
general
it was,
public.
yeah.
And there are times to be funny, and then there are times to be extraordinarily serious.
And give the man credit; he knows how to produce a TV show.
Yeah, absolutely.
He knows how to work the production industry. So you get enough clout behind it, you get enough proper funding and support,
sure.
And you have someone like Neil deGrasse Tyson who's also supporting, and he's your main narrator, and yeah, that's what you end up with.
Absolutely, but I mean, the other thing too is I think that there's a legacy to that's a very difficult thing to get away from, and when you're following in the footsteps of Carl Sagan, like,
right.
don't mess it up. Take it very seriously. Like, these are important.
Yeah.
It's an important part of the of the public discourse, you know what I mean? Especially in a portion of the public discourse that is not as well informed as it could or should be, providing better resources to, improve that aspect of the public discourse in a way that's like, meaningful and easily accessible. I mean, those opportunities don't come around very frequently, and when they do, I would hope that everybody who's involved in it recognizes the value of that opportunity and, does whatever they can to sort of kick it over the goal line,
So yeah, Bill Nye.
Yeah, Bill Nye.
All right, we're going to move into some gaming and general geekery news. But first, Joe brought over a nice case of, what is it?
Lagunitas
IPA. I am not an IPA kind of guy, but I'm currently on my second bottle. This is actually pretty tasty. I gotta tell you,
this is like, as far as I'm concerned, so I am not only an IPA guy, but apparently, like, per capita, Boston consumes like more IPA than anywhere else in the country.
Really?
I'm from Boston. The IPA is in the blood, and I gotta tell you, this is the best, I guess, sort of like major commercially brewed IPA that I've found. I think it's killer.
I'm typically not an IPA guy, but I don't know.
Half bad.
This isn't bad. This is pretty good stuff.
I'll have to move on to my second bottle.
Please
continue.
Got the bottle opener right over here, brother.
Thank you.
Yeah, so there's a little beer talk for you, but into some geekery type stuff. Stranger Things, the Netflix series. Continuing on with Netflix series.
Indeed.
Stranger Things was released or the makers of Stranger Things have released a season 2 teaser. Now, unfortunately, Joe has not watched this yet.
I'm so sorry. I feel as if I've committed some great cultural sin. My wife is chastising me extensively at this point for the fact that I've seen Stranger Things.
You need to watch Stranger Things.
I have this weird feeling that it's going to happen like one weekend and I'm just going to wind up binging the whole thing.
You're going to binge the whole thing. It is such great 80s sci-fi goodness. And it's done... I'm gonna fanboy a little bit right now for Stranger Things.
Fanboy away.
It is done in such great 80s fashion, but not overly campy.
I've actually heard that. I've heard that the writers and the director had like an extraordinary attention to detail in terms of like hairstyles and clothing and like furnishings and houses and like just the accoutrements and the cultural bric-a-brac of the time period. I heard was like exactly on point.
Yeah, there's like no anachronisms.
That's really cool.
Like everything, all of their decor or little decorations around the house are all straight out of the 80s. All the cars are straight out of the 80s. I don't know how they were able to find that many cars built in the 80s that are still in that good of condition, that are not like show cars. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like your common station wagons and sedans that are like rolling through the street. So it's not like the muscle cars that you would think in some of the the old body cars and big and huge and show. These are like the Woodies.
I was going to say random run of the mill.
Yeah,
sort
right.
of. Yeah, absolutely.
So there's all of that. The intro is what I found particularly 80s-licious, if I may go there.
You already did.
When the font appears on screen, it's like straight out of the 80s.
Awesome.
This real blocky type of font.
I know exactly the font you're talking about.
It's
sad I haven't seen it, and the minute you describe that font, I'm like, I have seen that font countless
You know what that font?
Yes.
With the kind of blur that's just kind of like the repeated fade of the letters. And even the theme music is like... like the beat machine scene, yeah, you know exactly what I'm talking about. And it's all dark and whatnot.
Moody.
So, yeah. But what really impressed me, or what I really enjoyed the most about Stranger Things, was that it was very limited on CGI. Like, they did not go down the CGI route.
I am a huge fan of the lack of CGI, personally. Like, you know, it's a very rare show or movie that I've seen where the CGI really, really, really does what it's supposed to do.
And when you get to that level, it's expensive.
It's expensive.
It's incredibly
and
expensive.
it's incredibly expensive. Like, to the point where it's prohibitively expensive, I would think, a lot of the time. And I agree with you. I think a lot of the time the effect that you're going to get through non-CGI methods is going to be vastly superior and probably a hell of a lot more cost effective.
You know, you would think so. I guess to do the slap it on type of CGI, and I mean
Just
no
don't.
disrespect.
No, but it diminishes the quality of your product.
Because you can tell so easily.
Oh, yeah.
Like, of course it's good in comparison to what the average person can do, because I can't get anywhere near that. But as soon as you see some type of like CGI serpent crawl out of a hole, it's like, you know it's a poorly done CGI.
Absolutely.
When you have the puppetry or the other costume effects, the lighting and the reflections are perfect because it's an
real
object that's actually there.
Absolutely. I'm waiting for you to make a Fangora reference, but anyways, please continue.
Actually, I'll go the route of Underworld.
Okay.
When the first movie first came out, they did almost all puppetry, and the only CGI effects that they had was like maybe rain or something like that. It's just the little touches here and there, but all the werewolves, they were all costumes and puppetry.
And there's some extraordinarily masterful,
those things are beautiful.
They're beautiful. Yeah. I mean, there are some incredible creative folks out there that do those things.
Yeah. And so when you have the lighting or like the action scenes, you don't need to worry about, is the fur flowing with the wind the correct way?
Does this image look flat? You know what I mean? Like, does it look is it believable in the space?
Right. Does the head jerk back at the proper moment of impact? You know, it's all there because it's actually happening.
All there, yeah.
So it's really, or for me anyway, I was really appreciative that they went that route and used lighting effects to kind of obscure anything that you might be able to pick out, because it was mood lighting on top of proper visuals.
Do you think that that's part of the reason why the show was as successful as it's been, is that it's in some ways it's kind of a throwback to different, I guess, sort of towards a different cinematic tradition where people were using more of the puppetry than they appear to be using now? Like,
I wouldn't be surprised.
And it gives it a more real feel, and people are going to gravitate towards that because it's more of an anomaly now.
Everything that we just said into that, I would probably agree with.
Okay.
Because it wasn't like a portal opens up and this weird thing comes out,
sure,
and it kind of floats around, but it doesn't cast the right shadows, or it's like, oh, great, some CGI tentacle just came out of the ground. It wasn't that. So yeah, the realism, like the sense, because that's what you're seeing, is much more solid.
Okay.
So, but yeah, they announced that there will be a season 2. All that they released was basically the episode titles.
Okay.
So that's all they're giving you.
So what you're saying is I have time to binge before the next binge.
Oh, easily.
Okay,
and it's a short season. It's only 8 episodes.
Oh, okay. All right.
Yeah, it's very short.
I could definitely plow through that in a weekend.
Oh, easily.
Yes, exactly. All right, I'm going to mark my calendar.
All right, good man. I got some guys at the office to watch it. And after the first guy watches, he's just like, oh my god, this is great.
I got to tell you, I have not heard anyone say anything but the best things about it, which is really kind of an extraordinary, ringing endorsement. And, I don't think that you hear too many shows that get that kind of ubiquitous, I guess sort of like public praise.
Right.
I think.
And I was just listening to the 8-Bit Bourbon podcast, and Adam was saying how it's getting higher rate or more viewership than like any other Netflix series.
Again, I'm not surprised. Like, it's seriously everything that I've read or seen in the social media space, because I mean that's how a lot of us get. I think the preponderance of our, I think more culturally shaped news at this point, has been nothing but positive. So I'm not surprised by that at all.
I honestly haven't seen anything. I've seen no negative critique of the show, really, whatsoever.
Really, yeah, nothing.
Yeah, I mean, and that's pretty extraordinary.
That is, yeah. So that is awesome. So we're getting. So yeah, if you haven't watched it yet, highly recommend it. It's only 8 episodes. They're an hour long, but easily doable if you're a super binger, in one sitting, if you're like that. But, yeah, Joe's smiling on the other side of the table. Do bathe on occasion, please.
It's only 8 episodes. If you need to bathe more than once during those 8 episodes, that's a totally separate conversation.
Alright, well, that's a whole other situation. Oh, man. Awesome. So yeah. So moving on, another reason why I couldn't wait to have Joe on this podcast is he is the person who originally got me into the Assassin's Creed franchise. Thank you, Joe.
It's totally a pleasure. When I played the first Assassin's Creed, open disclosure, I'm a recovering archaeologist and a bit of a history buff, because that's kind of what I did my degree work in.
Yeah, what was your degree in exactly?
Okay, I legitimately have the most obscure degree that a person can have. I have a master's in ancient Near Eastern and Eastern Mediterranean archaeology from University College in London, which means that I have moved on in my professional pursuits to something that actually has career development potential. And I say that tongue firmly implanted in cheek. And so to any alumni that may listen to this, I'm terribly sorry. But, playing the game was really kind of extraordinary because it takes place during the Crusades, and granted, it was certainly after the time that was the focus of my study area, but I found it like wildly historically accurate, not only in terms of its storyline, but also really aesthetically. Like the aesthetic of it, I thought was extraordinarily well researched. It was very well developed. It was beautifully executed, and it was like a total pleasure to play. And I remember when you and I first started having conversations about it, I think that was essentially what I said to you, and I'm thrilled that you got a chance to play it and enjoy it.
Yeah, the entire series is basically known for its historical accuracy,
yep.
As accurate as a video game can be.
To the point where there's actually isn't there a disclaimer at the beginning of it?
Yes. This game was developed by a multicultural
something
staff.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Yes,
because they present things the way it is. And it's like,
Certainly.
we don't mean to insult any particular culture, but this was what was happening in the world at
absolutely.
that time.
And what's interesting is that, especially given some of the geopolitical things that were going on when the first Assassin's Creed was released, that kind of cultural sensitivity was actually really kind of paramount, given where we were at as a nation and what it was that we were doing militarily in the Middle East, and the communities that we were connecting with, and the potential parallels that could have been drawn culturally between what was going on in the video game in the 12th century, give or take, and what was going on, I really think during modern times. So
yeah, so a lot of potentially touchy things.
Yeah, very much
in that
so.
game.
Absolutely.
And I remember just walking around Damascus in the game, and it's just gorgeous. Very simple color palette because that's the region of the world, but at the same time, gorgeous. I'll say it again.
Yeah.
And that is as close as anyone in modern times is going to be able to get to anything that would remotely resemble what those cities would have looked like during that time period.
Yeah, it's funny, and I don't want to sort of take the conversation, too far back to where it was that we
let
started.
the tangents fly, man.
Just sort of tangentially, going back to the virtual reality mentioned, earlier on in the conversation, I honestly wonder sometimes whether or not those kinds of digital experiences, for things like Assassin's Creed, or for, the ability to walk through a space that hasn't existed, in 900 years and change, I wonder if that, if what we're doing now in terms of the gaming experience, is really kind of the precursor to what VR may be providing us with the opportunity to do, in the next 20 or 30 years in a much more developed capacity.
We are getting incrementally closer to that reality.
I don't doubt that.
At the last E3, Bethesda, during their presentation,
I love Bethesda. Please continue. They make phenomenal digital products, but
they are so massive in their scale,
yes,
that people just give them a pass on all the bugs.
But they're huge. But the sophistication of their digital products is so extraordinary. Like, their IP is brilliant, it's beautiful, it's well executed, and you're right. I mean, I think that when you are in the innovation space digitally, like, there has to be a certain amount of latitude that's provided for the bugginess of.
There's so many different things, and you do the quest so asynchronously.
Oh, yeah.
That trying to accommodate things being done out of order. Like, I was playing Deus Ex Mankind Divided last night.
Yep.
And I had...
Is that the new Deus Ex?
That's the new Deus Ex.
How is it? Because I saw the commercial for it, and
So
I gotta tell you, it
great.
looks phenomenal, and again, like, maybe another rabbit hole that I will be disappearing down in the
Yeah,
future.
you will be. Did you play Human Revolution?
I have not.
Okay. Well, at the beginning of Mankind Divided, they have a 12-minute video that'll catch you up on the plot line.
That's excellent, because admittedly, like, I'm a total fantasy video game, enthusiast, and some of the things that deviate from those storylines are things that I don't have a tendency of necessarily gravitating towards. However, after having played things, like Skyrim or like Witcher 3, which, I know we're going to be chatting about in a little bit.
Yeah, we'll be
Total
chatting.
non sequitur. But, I realize that there's a pretty interesting opportunity to branch out into some other really pretty exciting gaming spaces that have storylines that I just haven't explored yet. And Deus Ex definitely, I mean, just given what I saw on the trailer and on the commercial for the new one, looked intense and extraordinarily well developed. And you know what it looked? It looked smart.
It
looked
incredibly smart.
It looked smart. It looked philosophically deep. It looked conceptually deep. That's what
blew my mind. I've only played Human Revolution, and I'm currently playing Mankind Divided. There were several others that came before this. Human Revolution was my entry point into the series, and I'm absolutely hooked. It is very philosophically deep in the conversations that you have with the people around you, and when you hack into computers and you read through people's emails and stuff like that.
I was listening again, and I'm an avid NPR listener, and I'll totally own that. And I don't know what that says about me, but that probably communicates a lot more than I would like it to. But I was listening to this. I think she was like an environmental biologist or something like that, and she was talking about how the next human evolution would not be a biological evolution. So basically, human biological evolution is operating too slowly for us to really see the byproducts of that evolutionary process, and that the next real major evolutionary phase isn't going to be biological evolution, it's going to be hybridization. And that's basically where this lives.
Yeah. Eidos and the people behind Deus Ex held a press conference.
Oh my god, I saw that. I know exactly what. Yeah.
And that's exactly where
there's a global ethical discussion that's going on this that, to the best of my knowledge, was actually catalyzed by Deus Ex. Because this has never been part of, I guess, sort of the global scientific discourse when it comes to cybernetics, or
it's because we have launched ourselves into it.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
So to back up a little bit, any type of technology that we develop enhances our innate human abilities somehow.
Absolutely.
Going back to the rock, instead of using our fist
going
or
to
our
fire,
teeth.
man.
Yeah, or building a fire. So you have a rock to kill an animal.
Sure.
All right, that evolved into a sharpened rock.
Sure.
Which evolved into a spear.
Which evolved into more sharpened rocks.
Even more sharp rocks. Well, smaller sharpened rocks on the end of these spears, and now we make those spears even smaller. Now we have a bow and arrow, and however far you want to go with that. So that's just weaponry. We have eyeglasses to enhance our natural...
But it's all externalized, and I think the difference here is that when you start talking about biointegration, it's a very, very, very different technology conversation, because it's the first time that we've ever been able to have technology fundamentally integrated into our bodies to the point where it can actually become augmentative.
That's where I was going to,
awesome.
In a very long-winded way, but basically everything that we do, telephones, the internet, that increases our ability to communicate. So with these cybernetic enhancements, and I've talked about Deus Ex on every one of my episodes so far, but it's that deep and significant.
It's very significant.
It is now
like climate change is now.
Right.
Like it is now.
So, I mean, what they're discussing is how far can we go with this? How far can we ethically go with this? Because we are way past, and I've said this in previous episodes, we are past the conceptual phase. We are now in the refinement.
I have to tell you, honestly, I think that's an amazing question because, quite frankly, I don't think that there's an ethical paradigm that exists to address the things that we are not only on the cusp of, but that we're technologically capable of now.
I think that we're going to literally have to envision a new a new ethical paradigm when it comes to that. And that, to the best of my knowledge, that was part of what this press conference was about, right? Yeah, they had an entire conference about it all. And I think it's going to have to maybe parallel that of massive, like, just weaponry and other communication stuff, because
or AI-based weapons systems, because I know that that's another conversation that's going on right now, where the global, legal infrastructure does not accommodate for the sophistication of weapon systems that could be deployed onto battlefields globally that are artificially intelligent. There's just not a legal framework to address how these things can be there and what should be allowable.
What is allowable? At what degree? At what power level?
Absolutely.
And
do these things have autonomy?
That's another very scary question, but that's the direction that we're heading in. I can't remember how we got onto this tangent, but Deus Ex spawned it all.
But what's interesting about the conversation around Deus Ex is that when you start talking about augmentative biointegrated cybernetics or something like that, and when you start talking about artificially intelligent weapon systems and their deployment on the battlefield and the lack of a legal framework to deal with those things, geopolitically, or when you start talking about the lack of an ethical framework to, I guess, sort of to frame what is allowable and what isn't allowable when it comes to augmentative biointegrated cybernetics or those things. Like we're like at a threshold. We're at a paradigm shift when it comes to our technological capability, and it's forcing us to, in a lot of ways, abandon some of the ethical paradigms that got us here because they're no longer complex enough or sophisticated enough or deep enough to deal with what our technology is capable of delivering into the world, and it's not capable of affecting, or it's not capable of framing how that technological experience will shape our lives or our ability to interact with each other or to maintain the systems that have evolved into being that have gotten us to where it is that we are right now. And I think games like Deus Ex, and what's interesting about something like that is that I almost wonder whether or not that's our culture's way of exploring the development of that paradigm in real time in the public space in a way that we've never had to do before. Does that make sense?
So. I think you're spot on, because in the game, you come across people of different political ideology or just ideology in general, whatever level you want to discuss it at, and it goes through very plausible situations.
Sure.
The difference between naturals and augs, as they call them. And there's a movement called Purity First, which are very anti-augs, and they have
which is total nativism in a completely different, wrapped in a totally different guise. But anyway, it's anti-technology as opposed to
anti-whatever. Yes. We'll let that set.
We're gonna let that happen.
Yeah, but really, that's exactly what it is. And different prejudices that arise, and what comes out. How does society react to that? So it's really interesting. Anyway, I did remember how we got back onto those tangents.
To Assassin's Creed?
To Assassin's...
it was VR. I'm so sorry.
No, it was Bethesda games.
Yes, it was. Okay, all right.
I finally remembered an asynchronous gaming plot.
Okay.
That's what I was scribbling over here on my notebook. You have these games that are such large scale that when you have these asynchronous gaming plots or plot lines, that in Deus Ex Mankind Divided, don't go on the tangent this time, I had like just busted out of this one area, and I'm just like hacking my way through everything and stealthing my way through all sorts of stuff and picking up anything that's not nailed down, basically, because that's what you do. And I picked up these like medical packages. Like there's nondescript, there was nothing in them, it was just medical packages, and they were listed as story items. And I thought to myself, well, here we go, asynchronous gaming going on. Don't know what these are for. There's no description associated with them, but I'm going to need them at some point. And I make my way a little bit farther into the game, and they were actually a quest item that someone was going to send me on a retrieval mission for.
Yep.
And they had already pre-programmed the dialogue in there where Adam Jensen, the main character, says like, after he's asked to go get these packages, he's like, I've already been there. The storerooms weren't as secure as they thought they were. Here they are. So they're already pre-programmed.
That's interesting. So it's adaptive storyline.
Yes,
That's interesting. And
the Bethesda games do that.
That's got to be because then what you're programming algorithmically, I think, are your gaming scenarios. You know what I mean? Like you're gaming non-linear scenarios within the engine,
and you're trying to accommodate for so many so many different variations of gameplay. There were some quests in some of the Fallout series where I would go do the side quests and then get back to the main storyline, at some point. And they would tell me to go clear out whatever this one location was or go retrieve this item. And I had the dialogue options already, like, hey, I've already been there, I already got it for you. Like, oh, whoa, you're efficient. So there was an entire conversation pre-programmed in anticipation of people doing things out of order.
Yep, absolutely.
How do you manage all of that and still maintain a bug-free game?
I don't know because you don't, because I mean, unless you recognize that there are only a certain number of action-oriented permutations that can affect any given situation or scenario, and basically what you're doing is you're algorithmically programming those permutations to adapt in real time.
And I'm going to take another few steps back. I remember how we got onto the Bethesda games.
Yes, please continue.
the VR aspect, and Bethesda during their E3 conference, bringing it all the way back.
Okay. Oh, yes. That was so 10 minutes ago.
Yeah, it really was. I'm looking at the time on the screen. They released VR games for Fallout 4 and Doom. Now, Doom, you're going to need extra pairs of pants to play if you're playing that in VR.
God, I'm going to have to go shopping.
But the idea...
tell my wife, honey, I'm going to go buy Doom and a couple of extra pairs of pants, because apparently that's what's necessary to play this properly.
So they're already establishing a system where a large-scale virtual environment is capable of being explored in a virtual reality setting. And what works for this is that these are already established games. They're established and well-known IPs.
Yep.
They're already created.
Yep.
And this, again, is not to diminish anything that Bethesda is doing, but they're already created. They're adapting a pre-rendered world for a VR application.
Interesting. I wonder if that's sort of I wonder if that's gapping. You know what I mean? Like, I wonder whether or not they recognize the fact that they've already got all of this back-end IP that they've developed, and then they're going to use it to jump platforms, and they're going to use it to build a baseline on a new platform that has potentially more significant evolutionary potential for their digital product. Does that make sense?
Yeah, okay. I think so. Because, like I said, they're established titles, established franchises.
Which is really interesting if you think about it in relation to, what is it, Wolfenstein 3D?
Yeah,
because that was the first... Wasn't that the first?
I think that was like one of the first.
One of the very first that was doing
a first-person shooter. What became the FPS genre.
So given that Doom, to the best of my knowledge, is an offshoot of what was once Wolfenstein, for them to jump platforms in that way may actually be the next evolutionary process to, from technology to technology in a way that mirrored, the development of that first-person shooter with the first Wolfenstein.
Yeah.
That's cool. That's really cool.
So that's pretty awesome.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, man. So we mentioned the Assassin's Creed movie and how you got me into the Assassin's Creed franchise. The Assassin's Creed movie, they released not too long ago I guess I'll call it a trailer of a 125-foot freefall stunt. Did you watch this?
I did.
That is awesome.
It is awesome. I will admit that as I watched that, I put myself in those shoes and wondered whether or not
Like, I wonder what it's like to say, I'm about to do the largest free fall in how many years was it?
30-ish?
Yes, I'm going to go throw myself
125
feet off of a platform into a very squishy sort of balloon at the bottom.
Yeah.
That's got to be an amazing feeling. I'll tell you, when the guy popped up out of it, he looked
oh my god!
endorphins.
Oh my god! Oh my god! Yeah.
It's pretty extraordinary.
Yeah. So this movie, if I'm not mistaken, is to take place during the Spanish Inquisition.
Again, with the Mel Brooks joke.
Well,
yeah, there's so much Inquisition.
Oh, whenever I played Dragon Age Inquisition, every time I started that game up, I started singing that stupid song.
It's unavoidable. You cannot
Inquisition. Let's begin.
You know what's awesome about that? Like, I'm fairly confident that you cannot talk about or teach or play through anything that involves the Inquisition and not reference that. I don't know. I feel like there's... Anyways, please continue.
But, like, with your, like, historical background, like, how many different storylines can they pursue if it's in that time frame? And knowing, like, you played the first few Assassin's Creed.
I did.
So you understand the connection between the game's lore and their plot premises and the church. And again, this is a non-political podcast. We're just making the correlations here.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but at one point in time, I want to say it was either in 3 or in 4, there was a lot of the plot line of the game was built out around how there was a brotherhood of assassins that was much larger than Altair and that had grown in its scope.
So
and its
that would be the fourth one. That would be Assassin's Creed Brotherhood.
Okay, so the
that's where it really expanded.
The potential, I think, to include additional plot lines, I think, really evolves from there, because depending on the geography of the participants in that brotherhood coming out of that particular storyline and where they lived and the historical context that they were a part of and the major I guess sort of things that were going on in those geographies at any given point in time, it could get, I think, really complex depending on how far out you allowed that gene pool to spread, because I mean it's all genetically based anyways.
Right.
So I think it's interesting. There's sort of like an Ancestry.com tie-in to this conversation. No, really. I mean, because you got to figure that fourth one took place in the...
That was Renaissance. It was
14th century. 15th century.
Yeah, if it was the Ezio trilogy.
Exactly. So
it's Renaissance Italy.
But then, so if you were to follow all of the members of that brotherhood, and if you were sort of to do the Ancestry.com version of it and see where they went, you know what I mean, until... the modern time, which was, forgive me, I can't remember.
Desmond Miles.
Yeah, exactly. To the time of Desmond Miles. Like, how many other Desmond Miles are out there that have roughly equivalent, embedded genetic experiences that could conceivably be tapped into in other physical geographies around the globe?
And at the end of Assassin's Creed 3, which is the consensus of the flop of the series, unfortunately.
I heard that, yes.
Yeah, the one that took place, locally, basically. You're right here in the Mohawk Valley.
Because I gotta tell you, the potential for that was great.
Oh, it was so great. Especially, us being, in Schenectady.
Yep.
The place where, right on our, city signs, we have the images of the Indians burning down the stockade.
For the second time.
The second time,
When burning it down once just wasn't enough.
So much discourse during that time period.
Yeah.
It was...
One more time with feeling. But anyways, please.
It was Assassin's Creed 4 Black Flag, where they introduced an expanded bloodline, and Abstergo was able to tap into... They developed the technology within the game that people could relive memories of other people not in their direct bloodline.
So I feel like that's almost like too much of a deviation from the primary
plotline,
isn't it?
It was kind of, but it was Abstergo. It's the Templars, and they were doing their limitless technology resources and stuff like that. So they were able to get a hold of like a store of different blood samples from the Templars.
Interesting. So what did they do? Just sort of embed it in the machine and allow the person
Basically.
Okay,
Yeah.
interesting.
Well, it's actually kind of interesting. They turned the Animus into a gaming platform and released it to the public.
That's interesting.
So, you know how you have like the gene folding or the protein folding stuff? They turned it into one of those concepts for people to go out and explore these different...
That's kind of remarkable.
Yeah, if you pay attention to the actual like modern day lore within Assassin's Creed, that is huge.
That's really interesting.
That is massive to the impact. But yeah, I mean the Inquisition, that time frame. I mean, church intrigue. State
oh my god!
intrigue.
It is like the definition of Byzantine political. You know, it's a Byzantine political environment. It's a Byzantine religious environment. It's weird. It's like this very toxic intersection of church and politics. You know what I mean? That was operating on an international scale,
with absolution.
Yes, absolution, and really with absolute power. I mean, with again, not to get
I guess
too
it's
heavy.
non-political.
Exactly, but when you start talking about the inclusion of divine mandate in terms of how people, interact with each other or control each other or manipulate each other or punish each other, I mean, those are some pretty extraordinary conditionals, to put into a cultural paradigm. You know what I mean? And the ability to explore that in a video game is incredible.
This one's going to be a movie. This is the Assassin's Creed movie that's coming out.
That's really that's interesting. I didn't realize that was sort of that actually makes a lot of sense. That's interesting. Anyway.
Yeah, right. Oh, it's good times. Jeez, we're going to run a little long on this podcast, but anyway, you actually wanted to talk about a little bit about The Witcher.
Yeah, I thought open disclosure on Witcher. I played. I'm one of those guys who will take a good fantasy game and play pretty much every quest line in the game until the game is done.
Hooray, completionist!
Yeah, I'm totally of that vein. Especially when you find, when I find something that is aesthetically beautiful, that's got a really sophisticated player experience, and something that's got really well constructed storylines and quest lines, and something that's sort of philosophically deep, and provides the ability to explore ideas outside of the game through the game. I think that's kind of an interesting thing.
Now, we were talking before we started recording, and I have not played The Witcher. However, I was able to pick up Witcher 2 for free when it was free on Xbox Games with Gold, and I was only able to get through like the intro mission. And we were talking before we started recording how you felt like this is one of the games where they're making games now for a mature audience.
Very much so, and I think that's what's so extraordinary about this game.
And like I played the intro, and it was just like the intro cinematics. And when girl is waking up in bed with whoever, I can't remember her name at this point.
Insert prostitute X is basically what it comes down to.
And I'm like, wow, we're going there.
Yeah, absolutely.
We're going there right up in the intro cinematic.
You know what's interesting about it though is the sexual content in the series, because it's not just in 3, it's in the series as a whole, is actually not even really the most provocative aspect of what makes this game, or these games rather, adult games. There is a bleakness to these games that is not something that I've seen in most other games. There are a whole host of scenarios where there is absolutely no good choice.
Oh, man.
It's lose-lose. It just depends on what you want to lose and how you want to lose it. You know what I mean? And there's a cynicism to it that I think is really dark, and there is, I think, sort of a real worldiness sort of to it that is not something that I've seen in too many other games.
Okay.
You know what I mean? So the sexual content, I feel, to a certain extent, it's almost like it's like a byproduct. To not have that in a space that is already this dark,
because
would be
it'd be a disservice because it's like we're going to go all the way to the extremes on all these different things, but this little section right
kind of
here,
can't touch that. I
Yeah.
mean, it would be a little bit puritanical and kind of overweening for a game series that is neither puritanical nor the series does not play it safe in any way, shape, or form. Either in terms of, I mean, it is sex and violence. It is sex and violence. It's power and control. It shows the dangers of religion. It shows the pitfalls of complex politics.
Okay.
It's interesting. There are really complex gender politics in the game.
Really?
I thought were
Okay.
absolutely, that were very interesting.
Anything that you can give as an example?
It was the first time that I have ever seen openly gay characters in the game in situations that could be sexualized for the game player themselves.
Okay, because BioWare's gone down that road.
That's
few
interesting.
times.
I didn't realize
Yeah,
that.
BioWare in their Dragon Age and Mass Effect games, they've gone down that road. It's not. I mean, it's openly gay, but it's not. It's still kind of off to the side, if you know what I mean.
And that's what this is too. But for me personally, that was the first time that I had ever seen
so in
that.
your gaming experience.
In my gaming experience, and it was one of those things where I think that actually shows. First of all, I think it shows the prevalence of the issues that that are part of that aspect of the game in our current society, and the need to bring those into the gaming experience and to explore those in the gaming experience. But I also think that it shows I think it shows a willingness on behalf of the developers to bring complex issues into the game that are open-ended, that don't have that depending on how you see those issues, there's a level of moral ambiguity that I think is really interesting in this game, that is allowed for, that I haven't seen in other games. And I'm not falling out on that spectrum in any way, shape, or form, but the choice potential in what this game allows for, I think, is not something I've experienced before. And I think that those choices, they're very adult choices. You know what I mean? And they're
the moral ambiguity is becoming more prevalent in gaming. Some play a little bit safer than others. One thing that comes to mind is Watch Dogs. Unfortunately, Aiden Pierce was a pretty dry character, but critiques aside of the game, there were plenty of times where there wasn't necessarily a clear choice, a clear right or wrong, and there are also a lot of things. Obviously, the game dealt a lot with cybersecurity and personal information, and there were times where, like, one of the side quests that you could do was you go outside of different apartment buildings or other business complexes, you hack into some remote location access point outside the building, you work your way through the network, and you're able to get a hold of some type of camera somewhere in the building. And through that camera, you kind of move around, and you land the camera on someone's either laptop or cell phone or tablet or something, and you're able to hack into their bank accounts and steal their money. Okay. So that's done repeatedly. Some of the things that you see while you're looking through that camera, some of them are kind of funny. There's one where Aisha Tyler's character in there, she does a few voices in the game.
Does she really?
Yeah, she does.
That's fantastic. Okay.
She's so awesome.
Yes.
Where she's like, listen, if people want to spy on me while I'm lounging around my apartment farting, whatever, do your thing. Yes, that's so Aisha Tyler.
Yes.
So that's, the comp. There's another time where you work your way through and you could watch someone playing some Dance Revolution game, or one of the Just Dance games, and they're joking around. You got a stupid.
Think about what you're talking about, though. I mean, essentially, you're talking about cyber voyeurism within a video game. I mean, it's
and here's where it gets really dark and kind of twisted. There are others that are not comical, and they are very serious and will make you feel uneasy. Again, the idea of these activities, you can get more money through little cybercrime. So that whole moral discussion is a discussion all of its own. But some of the things that you're watching, you end up seeing a couple. They're laying in bed. The man is coughing his brains out. And the wife is saying, honey, I know this isn't a comfortable thing to talk about, but we need to start getting your resources in order. And it turns out this guy's like dying of cancer.
Sort of like end of life conversation.
It's an end of life conversation,
which is really kind of the most intimate conversation
you
that
can
two people can possibly have.
And you're going around the room, and you're like, "Oh, I'm going to hack this guy's bank account," and I'm like.
It's interesting because the context of the moral
ambiguity.
Well, that's a really interesting set of decisions.
And there's other situations like that where, again, I get it, it's a game, and there's no consequences, but these are the real risks.
You know what's interesting, though? Yes, you're right, there are no consequences, but I honestly feel like the ability to do that in the digital environment is an opportunity to explore our own moral, and ethical paradigm in a way that that we wouldn't otherwise. And the fact that we're starting to create game spaces that allow us to explore stuff that is that complex and that's that sensitive is really interesting, because I mean, just think about the game space 5 years ago. It was not doing what it is that you're describing.
Not to this level.
Not to this level. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean,
and there's other situations where you can walk down the street, and if you just get someone within your camera view, you can, I'm using air quotes right now, hack their cell phone and get their bank information. But whenever you profile someone, a little snippet of whatever their hypothetical life is like this person's a collector of comic books, this person does this person does that. And I mean, you can kind of chuckle, but it brings a sense of realism, in like, these are real people that are victims of these crimes.
Yep.
And you can kind of chuckle along, and it's like, oh, well, I share interests with that person, so I'm not going to, take his money. Or you see what this other person is into, like, oh, screw that guy, I'm going to totally take his money. What does that say about you?
It's so interesting because I keep coming back to the VR component of this conversation, because, like, so if we know that Doom is jumping, jumping platforms and heading off into VR, how long is it before this stuff becomes VR? And I think more so than that, how long before, I mean, there are digital currencies that are out there. I think it's Warcraft that actually has a monetary value for certain items. To the best of my knowledge, people are actually selling things.
World of Warcraft definitely, absolutely has some type of like trading post thing where people like sell accounts or sell resources for actual money.
But yeah, you're talking about real money for digital assets, and there's a blending that's going on there in a way. There's an overlap between real world economic systems and virtual or game embedded economic systems. Because, and I'm not just talking about it in terms of currency, but I'm talking about in terms of like either hard assets or the digital version of hard assets. When you start talking about the jump from one platform into another, there's only a certain amount of time before, that conversation that you're watching or the ability to hack into that person's bank account, how close can that get in a VR context to having the ability to tap into somebody's real bank account only in a virtual environment as opposed to in a real environment? There's a really interesting blending space that could conceivably evolve into in I suspect probably a not too distant period of time.
No, it's going to come quick. Whew.
Yeah.
All right.
We got that.
Okay, so
back to Witcher.
No, if there's something else you want to talk about,
no, I just you mentioned earlier, the racism that you saw in Deus Ex, or the would you classify it as like xenophobia kind of thing, or is it
not so much xenophobia?
Okay,
because it doesn't have to do with anyone from an outside country. It's your own countrymen. It's your own.
But it's Augs versus non-Augs.
Exactly.
Okay. There's a lot of racism in Witcher 3.
Okay.
In certain plot lines, which is really interesting. There's an enormous amount of racial tension between elves and dwarves and humans and a variety of other different species or different humanoid sort of species, which is really interesting. It's interesting to experience that in a digital space. It's actually interesting to be on the receiving end of it in the digital space because Geralt, who's the main character, is a Witcher, and Witchers are viewed as freaks.
Yeah.
And they're ostracized, they're treated, pejoratively, they're marginalized, etc. And, not only are you on the receiving end of it, but you also get the opportunity to connect with other, I guess, sort of like, for lack of a better way of putting it, like minority populations within the game space, and connect with them on the fact that you are in some sort of a socially disadvantaged group just like they are. And it's interesting because, again, I feel like we're having this conversation with ourselves in a space that, is not a real world environment. And
because this is what's going on.
This is what's going on. It's mimetic. It's really, really interesting. And the other thing that I found really prevalent in it was that there's an ardent sense of misogyny in the game. Like, there's hardcore... And it's well, what's interesting about it is that it's this low-lying, sort of implicit aspect of the gender role dynamic in the game. And I actually have, on a number of occasions, wondered, like, I have a friend named Delynn who is a hardcore gamer girl, and I love her to bits. She's awesome people. I respect the hell out of her opinions on games. And she plays the same kinds of games that I do, so we do a bit of back and forth in terms of, like, what's good and what's not. Cool. And I've often wondered, like, what Delynn's experience of this game would be versus what my experience of this game would be, and
strictly
how she,
based on gender.
Strictly based on gender, and, like, how she would perceive, the main character, and how the main character connects with women or doesn't connect with women, and how women are portrayed. I thought it was really interesting because there is this extremely misogynistic subtext to it that, in a way, it's almost caricaturized to the point where if you're paying attention to it, if you're paying attention to the game, you should be paying attention to this, and it should make you uncomfortable. That's the only way I can describe it. Like, if you're not catching it, you're not paying attention, you're missing an aspect of the game that's really important. And I feel like there's this almost sort of subliminal-ish message that this is not okay in this space, but it's what goes on, and it shouldn't be okay in the real world, but it's what goes on. Again, I feel like there are a lot of parallels that are being drawn.
There's so much social commentary.
Oh my god, it's absolutely.
In modern gaming, basically.
But what I find really striking about it is the level of subtlety of that social commentary. Because, there's social commentary where, like, you're being bludgeoned over the head by the social commentary, and then there are these things that they're very it's very subtextual. It's sort of the background hum of the game dynamic. You know what I mean? But if you don't pick up on it, you're kind of not.
Yeah. You're missing it.
You're missing it, and in a way, you're actually missing the full dimensionality of what the game offers.
All right, so we're going to move into the final phase of this podcast. All right, so this is the final 5. These are 5 questions to wrap up the podcast that range from irrelevant to irreverent.
All right.
So first question.
Like both, anyways.
The first 2 are pretty standard, and the last 3 spark even more discussion.
Okay.
So, first one, coffee or tea?
Coffee.
Coffee.
Yes. Dark, black, like my soul. Black like my heart, yes.
Excellent. Yeah, same here. Do you do any tabletop gaming?
Oh god, I haven't done that in a million years, but I love it. I used to play, so I played a ton of Warhammer and a ton of Space Marine.
Oh, you got it. You're a Warhammer guy.
I played a ton. I did did plenty of did get my D&D on a million years ago. I had an amazing DM, Nathan Schomer. If you're out there and you're listening, much love. It was awesome. He was an amazing DM. But things moved very quickly into hardcore Warhammer and Space Marine.
Wow. All right. Third question. Theravada or Mahayana?
Oh, Mahayana.
Mahayana?
All day. Practicing Buddhist, who is sitting here drinking an IPA, so yes.
All right, so what exactly is the difference between the Theravada and the Mahayana?
Oh, well, Mahayana is Buddhism. Theravada is a practicing school of Buddhism as well. I don't, to be honest with you, know very much about it.
Okay.
I just know that I practice Zen, which is probably doctrinally closer to the Mahayana school than Theravadan is. Beyond that, I don't know that I could really
get
give
into.
you. Yeah,
Okay.
exactly. That's actually a really complex question. there are classes that are taught on that question, but anyways.
The answer is woo.
Yeah, the answer is woo. Or woo, as the case may be.
The Pogues or Flogging Molly?
Oh, the Pogues.
The Pogues all the way?
That's not even a question.
Sorry.
That's not even a
Sorry.
question. I actually, alright, not to digress too much, but little story about the Pogues. I used to bounce at this, I was a bouncer at an Irish bar in Boston a million years ago, and it was a lot of fun, and I've opened up many a door with other people's faces, but that's also a longer conversation. So, anyways, I was at the bar one night, and my brother Mikey was there. Mikey comes over to me and he's got this like frenzied look on his face, and I'm like, dude, what's going on? Are you okay? And he's like, you have no idea who's sitting at the bar. And I'm like, no, I don't. Who's sitting at the bar, Mike? And he said, Shane McGowan's sitting at the bar.
Oh, wow.
And I looked at him and was like, oh my God, are you kidding me? And so I said, that's fantastic. And he's like, there's more. And I said, well, what's going on? And he pulls out a wad of $300 and he goes, this fell down below Shane McGowan's chair. And I was like, wait a minute, what? And he's like, Shane McGowan just dropped $300. And he looked at me, he's like, well, what do I do with it? And I said, Mike, what do you mean, what do you do with it? He said, give Shane McGowan back his $300. Yeah. And he was like, all right, awesome. So Shane McGowan is sitting there, and ironically, Shane McGowan, when he had terrible teeth, because he did, legendarily so.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Was not from whiskey. Shane McGowan was an ardent drinker of peach schnapps. It was horrible, horrible stuff. Oh, awful. And like, if that doesn't rot your teeth, nothing will. But anyways,
right.
So Shane McGowan is sitting at the bar with a shot glass full of peach schnapps, and he's furiously scribbling away on a bar napkin. Okay. And my brother walks over, taps Shane on the shoulder, and goes, I think you dropped this, and hands Shane McGowan the $300. Shane takes the $300, looks at my brother, looks him up and down, makes my hair stand up, talking about this, okay? Doesn't say a word, takes the napkin that he's been writing on, crumples it up, throws it over the bar, pulls another napkin out, and starts writing. Writes for about 5 or 6 minutes, okay? And then looks at my brother and I, and he's like, can I buy you guys a drink? And we were like, oh my God, yeah, would you like to have a whiskey? And he's like, I don't drink whiskey, I drink peach schnapps. And I was like, that was a weird moment because I was like, wait, you don't drink whiskey, you drink peach schnapps? What? But anyways, yeah, it just didn't anyways, so we sat down, we had a drink with Shane McGowan. He was absolutely lovely, just super, super nice guy, great conversationalist, you know what I mean? Just nice, interesting dude. And, you know, we went our way and he went his way. About 45 minutes later, he was with an absolutely lovely lady who was sitting immediately off to his left, which it should be no surprise, regardless of the teeth. But anyways, she came over to us and she said, I just want you to know what happened. And I said, well, no, I have absolutely no idea what happened. And she said, well, Shane was writing a song when you guys came over. And we said, really? We had no idea. And she said, yeah, he was writing a song about how humanity sucks and how you can't trust people and how everyone is in this for themselves. And then your brother came over and handed Shane McGowan back his $300, and Shane crumpled up the song and started to write something new. So I just want you to know that in that small act of kindness, your brother changed Shane McGowan's perspective on how people are. Yeah, it was one of those like. Anyways, so Pogues, like all day Pogues. Anyways,
wow.
I know, seriously,
that's a heck of a story.
Hey man, drank whiskey with Shane McGowan. So
nice.
Love you, Flogging Molly. Have seen you a dozen times. Knitting Factory back in 1999-ish, and then some. Mm-hmm. Love me some Pogues.
All right. Final question.
The final question.
Yes. Stay with me for a bit. Under your watch, how many mortars of freedom rained down drops of liberty over this past treasonous colonial day?
Oh, so many mortars of freedom.
All right. So,
do I have to actually give you a number?
So
346,228. I don't know if they're simultaneous, though. I feel like they should be staggered, at least.
So the story behind this is Joe posted on Facebook a mortar the size of my head.
Oh, that mortar.
Yes.
Oh, okay. I thought you were talking... Okay.
No, that's a treasonous colonial day for our United States Independence Day.
Yeah.
Now the joke sets in.
Okay, all right. Yes, thank you for clarifying that. How many mortars?
Yeah.
Okay, so are we talking about this most recent explosive
Yeah, the most
device?
recent one.
Okay, so I should clarify now that we're talking about explosives. I am in the process of being licensed to become a professional pyrotechnician on the side. And I have been shooting professional grade fireworks for the last 5 years.
and have been shooting it with a major fireworks house that operates up and down the Eastern Seaboard. If you're talking about this past year,
yes,
that is the largest professional grade firework allowable by law for transport over land without a police escort. It's it's huge. That is an 8-inch shell. It's bigger than your head.
Yep.
I shot it out of a tube that's as tall as me. The ground shook. It rained fire over my head.
You mean drops of liberty?
Yeah, so many drops of liberty. No, I mean literally, like when it shot out of the tube, the ground completely shook, and I managed to make it 15 feet away. I hand lit it. I lit it with a road flare. It was the largest firework that we shot at that show. It went 2,000 feet in the air. Okay, and the break on that explosive was 1,500 feet in diameter. It was gargantuan, and I have to tell you, I would like those every day. It was wonderful. Anything that I have to lower down into the tube with a rope, I'm all about it. Anyways.
Oh, man. Fantastic.
I gotta tell you, it was super cool.
And that is all the time we have for this episode. Time for end of show plugs. You can follow me, Anthony Rossi, on my personal Twitter at Hypersyntax. That is at HYP3RSINT4X. Or you can follow the podcast directly at VGXTPod. Also on Facebook at facebook.com/videogamecrosstalk. The podcast is hosted directly on Podbean and can be found at videogamecrosstalk.podbean.com. As for my guest Joe, where can our beautiful listeners follow you around?
You can't.
Okay, so you're not not so much on the social media, but give your consulting.
You can. I'm Joe at jsbermanconsulting.com. You can reach me by email there, and you can find me on Facebook. I'm Joe Berman.
All right. And finally, if you are a gamer or know a gamer that wants to talk some tech or science news, let me know. Do you know of some tech news that you'd like to hear discussed? Do you have any other general questions that you would like answered on the show? Send an email to videogamecrosstalk@gmail.com and give me the deets on what's going down. Please don't forget to like, review, subscribe, and share this podcast all over your social media accounts, and we can be found on iTunes, Stitcher, and Google Play. Thank you one last time for hanging out with us. Thank you, Joe, for coming to do this podcast.
Absolutely a pleasure.
And in the words of Buddha, there are only 2 mistakes one can make along the road to truth. Not going all the way and not starting.